Hi, folks. Sorry about the delay. We were just in a staffing meeting. I apologize for the delay.
No worries. Let me just get this set up. Give me 1 second. Okay, and we're good. Thanks, everyone. We'll get started. Thanks for your patience.
One moment. Sorry, I just need to. So thanks to everybody for being here with us today. Today, we're going to be joined by Dr. Steve Federico from Denver Health to share some insights into the current health conditions for our community. But first, I wanted to share a few district updates. So as you may have heard earlier this week, 2 of our indicators were red. We definitely see some movement up and down with those indicators. But the indicators triggered a conversation with our local health officials on the most appropriate steps moving forward at this time. And given the fact that we have seen limited disruptions in our elementary school in-person schooling, the fact that elementary school age students have significantly lowered COVID risk and that remote learning is particularly challenging for our elementary school students and families. We, with the guidance from Denver Health, will continue moving forward with opening our elementary schools to all K-5 students. However, we are going to pause on our middle school and high school reopening plans for in-person learning, and we'll continue remote learning. We will reevaluate at the end of October to see where we are and what the trends look like, and potentially look at resuming our plans in November. Special education center programs and our newcomer center programs serving students who are at the earliest stages of learning English, and our remote learning centers in our secondary schools are an exception. And so we will open those special programs for students with special needs, English learner newcomers, and our remote learning support centers will open at the start of second quarter. We definitely know that this is a big disappointment for our secondary students and our school leaders and staff who've been working really hard to make plans to safely reopen our doors. It was not an easy decision to make, and yet we know that the most important thing that we can do is focus on health and safety, and the current COVID conditions and guidance that we are receiving leads us to believe that this is the best decision that we can make. Like all other districts, our DPS is facing some very critical staffing shortages in our schools that are open for in-person learning. These shortages are a result of a few things. We ask people to stay home when they have any symptoms of any illness. We have supported team members who have accommodations and remote work as a result, based either on their own status or family member status. And as a result of that, our leadership team is asking all of our central office staff members to support our schools as much as possible. We will be assigning central office team members, including myself and my leadership team, to be available to support schools at least 1 day a week. We're assigning both certified teachers who work in our central support teams and non-certified support staff for office supervisory responsibilities, things like lunch duty, recess coverage, allowing staff members in a school to do sub coverage and covering some of those outside of the classroom duties that are helping keep our schools up and running. I want to take a moment to just name how much I value our team members and the important work they do in supporting DPS and our mission to educate students. I have been saying repeatedly, if education is not essential, I don't know what is, and the impact of providing in-person supports whenever we can to our students is the most essential work I believe democracy can provide to our children. Our students need us now more than ever, and I'm incredibly grateful to all members of Team DPS who are making sure that we support them. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Federico to share some updates about the health conditions district-wide.
Yeah, thank you, Susanna. I think what I'd like to share with this group is that what we're seeing is a significant spread. Susanna alluded to the stoplight report on the DPS website. It's a great snapshot in time that shows the trend across our county for the rate at which cases are increasing, the rate of transmission is increasing, and the positivity rate, so the rate at which we are getting positive tests for the people that we test for COVID is also going up. Since we've been looking at these indicators collectively, we've not had a scenario where all three were going up at the same time. And so the way we use that stoplight report is to convene our team and to discuss what those metrics mean. And when all three of them were going up all at the same time, the decision was made that there would be considerable amount of disruptions in in-person learning if we were to return at the middle school and high school levels, meaning there would just be more cases than there had been in the past. And it would mean that more kids would have to quarantine as a result of being exposed. And it did not seem like the optimal time to efficiently reopen those age groups. We're hopeful that through other mitigation measures in the community that those rates will stabilize and come down, and we will have an opportunity to bring kids back into school. Because as a pediatrician, we've been advocating very strongly in the pediatric community to have kids in school. We think it's incredibly important, and think that we need to work very intentionally towards that goal. It's just that at the moment, the rate of rise in the community is significant. And for those of you that are following the different levels, we are teetering between levels 2 and 3 of safer at home. And so the case rate of over 200 per 100,000 Denver residents is something we haven't seen for several months. One of the other things we've seen commensurate with that community transmission rate is the rate of COVID cases in school-age kids, but most especially amongst our high school and middle school age kids, it's gone up above a level that we've not seen for several months. Just speaking to the fact that if we were to reopen those age groups, we would have more cases in our classrooms. So we thought it prudent to pause and to reassess in a couple of weeks' time to see if our community mitigation measures will bring those rates down and allow us to bring kids back into the classroom. So with that, I'd be happy to entertain questions and shed some light on that.
All right, thank you. So our first question, Megan Lopez from Denver 7.
Good morning, y'all. Thanks for having us. I'm wondering if, what was kind of the thought process, if you can peel back the curtain a little bit, into this idea of not just going ahead and delaying it past the fall semester, since it's only going to be really a few week difference. And if you think that that would be too disruptive to bring people back just a few weeks before the winter break happens, I guess, for high schoolers in particular.
Sure, and I'm happy to take that question. One of the things that we have learned, and certainly I don't feel like I am expert in any way on how to respond to global pandemics, but I feel like I'm getting smarter as we move forward. When we made the announcement this summer that we were going to have a remote first quarter, we actually saw a significant downturn in COVID rates after we had made that commitment. And we frankly don't want to lose the opportunity to serve students in person when we can, if we see the numbers move down. This summer we saw a dramatic decline as the governor announced mask orders, as new public health enforcement orders came out. And my hope is, frankly, that we will see something similar happen right now. I think it's really incumbent on all of us, and I know our mayor is watching this very closely, to adhere to public health orders because of the importance, not just of schools being open, but the impact that it has on our entire community. And in the event that we do see those numbers move down, we think it's super important that we give students the chance to be in person, even if we're not able to do that for as long as we would like to.
And then just quickly, are we able to get a copy of that report that you all are referencing?
I think she means the stoplight report, Susanna, so maybe we can post the link.
Sure. And it's posted publicly on our homepage. If you go to our homepage, you'll see a red button on the right side that says COVID conditions, and that is updated on a daily basis.
Great. Thank you, guys.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'll drop that link here for everyone. Our next question is from Jesus Armando from Univision. Go ahead, Jesus.
Buenos días, gracias. En español, Susana, ¿puede decirnos por qué retrasar el regreso a las aulas de clase y cuándo volverían los estudiantes a la escuela?
Ok, muchísimas gracias por la pregunta. Primeramente, quiero asegurar que estamos regresando a clases presenciales para las familias que escogieron clases presenciales en todas nuestras primarias. Es muy importante decir que los de primaria van a seguir con sus clases presenciales y los que todavía no han regresado, estamos regresando la semana que entra, empezando el 21. Para los alumnos de middle school y high school, de la secundaria y preparatoria, es poquito más difícil. Usando la recomendación de Denver Health, no vamos a regresar tan pronto que queríamos. Queremos averiguar qué pasa con los casos de COVID, si siguen subiendo o si empiezan a bajar. Vamos a tomar tiempo para decidir ya en los fines de octubre si vamos a regresar en noviembre.
Great. We have a question from Jackie Lopez at Telemundo.
Hola, buenas tardes. Me gustaría saber si se tomó en cuenta a los padres de familia que habían optado por regresar a clases presenciales cuando se tomó la decisión de retrasar la fecha para los estudiantes de secundaria y preparatoria. Y si es así, ¿qué fue lo que ellos dijeron?
Ya, realmente depende de la familia, de la escuela. Tenemos algunas escuelas donde la mayoría quieren regresar a clases presenciales y tenemos también en ocasiones escuelas en donde muchos quieren seguir con clases virtuales y como distrito queremos asegurar a todas nuestras familias si escogieron clases virtuales van a seguir con esta opción, ni modo si ofrecemos clases presenciales. No vamos a forzar que vengan a clases presenciales si escogieron clases virtuales. En todo el distrito, el promedio de clases presenciales era casi poquito más de la mitad que querían clases presenciales. En algunas de nuestras preparatorias especialmente es muy difícil arreglar un horario en donde se puede ofrecer todas las clases para todos los alumnos con maestros que tienen permiso de trabajar en virtual y con todas las clases, pero cada escuela sí tiene un horario tan pronto que se pueda para ofrecer clases y apoyos presenciales.
Thank you. Tini Ricciardi with the Denver Post has a question.
Hi, thanks, Susanna. So some parents have seen other metro districts be able to work out hybrid and in-person learning and are confused why DPS can't or won't. What would you tell those parents about your district's approach versus others?
Yeah, so thank you. I think it's a really important question. You know, since March, we have been committed to following the guidance of our local health professionals. And so this is not a question of can't or won't or lack of desire to be able to do so. We were moving full steam ahead with our plans around returning all of our students starting in second quarter. And it really was based on the guidance from Denver Health that we felt that it was important to give our city an opportunity to drive down the numbers of COVID with secondary students before we bring them back in person. I can assure you there was no one with a greater desire to return students to in-person than me. I understand how critically important in-person supports are for our students. We are moving forward with in-person for our students with special needs, with our students who are learning English as a second language. We will continue to offer remote learning support centers in our secondary schools because we know there are many students who really struggle in the remote environment. What I would urge everyone is please help us open up our schools fully by practicing all of the health and safety measures to drive down the rates of COVID in our community. It's the rates in our community that is the barrier right now, particularly for our secondary students. And Dr. Federico, I don't know if there's anything more that you would like to add to that as Denver Health considered the guidance that you gave us.
No, I think it's a very good question, and I would like to add the couple points. One is that we have learned from other districts that have been open, and there's great value in having schools in person to learn from. And one of the things that we have learned on the pro side of bringing kids back to school is that, as we've seen around the world, the same is true here in Colorado, that the spread of COVID within schools, when we follow the mitigation measures of wearing masks and spacing, is very, very, very low. So the reason not to be in school is not necessarily the risk of spreading COVID amongst students. The risk of being in school is largely around having to start and stop again. The quarantining that happens when you do have a case in school that causes lots of kids to have to go home, and the difficulties of doing education in fits and starts. And what we saw over the last 2 weeks with the significant uptrend in cases and transmission is a rate at which those disruptions would happen very often. And one of the things that's different about Denver is, unfortunately, COVID is not equal across all populations. I think it's been well documented across the country that families who live in poverty and Black and Latinx populations are disproportionately impacted by COVID. And those populations are highly represented in Denver public schools. And so our case rates in some of our communities are significantly higher than some of the surrounding areas. And so we have to pay attention and be sensitive to that population and the experience that's going on in those neighborhoods, and recognizing that as those case rates go up, so too will the case rates amongst our students. And so the likelihood of having a positive case in a school goes way up. Thus, the likelihood of having a disruption and having to stop schools based on a quarantine goes way up. And so trying to make sure that we can bring kids back safely, but also efficiently in a way that is predictable for both children and families is also important. And so those are all the factors that we're weighing when we watch and track these metrics so closely.
Awesome, thank you. If I could ask a quick follow-up, I'm curious how, if at all, the staffing shortages played into the decision to keep middle and high schools in remote learning.
Yeah, so thank you for that question. Definitely staffing can be challenging, much more challenging at the secondary level than at the elementary level. This is not a move that was made based on staffing. It really was a reflection of COVID in the community.
Thank you. Melanie at Chalkbeat has a question. Go ahead, Melanie.
Thank you so much. So my question is about the racial disparities in students who are choosing virtual versus in-person learning for when schools do reopen. Susana, I'm wondering what the district makes of these disparities, and if you have concerns about the differences in instruction or concerns about learning loss or learning gaps.
Yeah, so certainly, I think that we all should have concerns about learning loss throughout this global pandemic. It is such a difficult and unusual time for all of our students, and particularly for our students who live in neighborhoods that are more heavily impacted by COVID. We definitely see that more Latinx, African-American and Black students are selecting virtual options, and frequently they live in communities that have been much more heavily impacted by COVID, and their experience with COVID firsthand reflects, I think, their concerns about in-person instruction. We've worked really hard to improve the quality of in-person instruction, and I do want to just name that we definitely are committed to honoring and providing quality experiences, both for in-person and for virtual. We've been able to make significant changes, both in our platforms, the ease of access, things like that. We're working really hard to improve connectivity in neighborhoods. And I also want to name, unfortunately, some of our communities of color also have more problems with telecom issues. So if you look at the far Northeast, there's a spot on I-70, if you've ever been on your telephone, where calls drop. And students that are using hotspots that are dependent on cell service for access have a more difficult time with stable access to the internet. And so we know that there are real challenges that our communities of color in specific neighborhoods are facing, some of which I think we have the power to address, both in terms of training for our teachers and supports for remote learning, and some of which I think are going to be much more challenging to address as a school district, and where we need the entire community to support us with this.
Thanks. Sonia with 9 News has a question.
Hi, thank you so much. I wanted to ask if you have any updated numbers on attendance, and also I wanted to ask if we can have if we can talk about the possibility of parents having to plan to stay at home for the rest of the year.
I'm sorry, I'm actually out of school and there's some construction happening outside. I didn't hear the second half of that question. The first one was around attendance and the second half was parents.
Should parents plan to stay home for the rest of the year?
Okay, thank you. So let me talk about attendance first. Our attendance figures last week on average were at 88%. That's definitely lower than it is when we're in person. We have been able to connect with the vast majority of students who we had considered no contact students. At this point, we have about 180 students that we haven't been able to contact. The majority of those are in our pathway schools in the charter sector. And so we're really working hard to determine if they have moved out of Denver, where they are, to make sure that we have accounted for all of our kids. We've begun the effort of working on students who are low engagement. And so if they're participating less frequently, we are working on doing much more significant outreach to support families whose students are struggling with engagement within the remote setting. Do want to just remind folks that we are opening up our elementary schools for in-person. And we know how critical it is, particularly for elementary school students. It's so challenging to learn in the remote setting, particularly at the earliest grades. And our goal is to continue to safely welcome our students back. We're going to cautiously monitor what's happening. It's part of the reason why we really need people to do their part in the community to drive the numbers down. Wear your mask, practice social distancing, limit exposure to people outside of your home. Really, really important for us to be able to run our schools. And so our hope is that parents won't actually have to stay home. I know many parents, particularly middle school age parents, it's that challenging age, 6th through 8th grade, where they sort of can be alone, but they still need help. And so it's really challenging, I know, for our middle school age students, but for our elementary school students in particular, where it is so challenging if parents are working to be able to support their students at home. Our schools will be open for in-person learning for elementary school age kids.
Okay, I think that'll wrap it up. Thanks everyone, and we'll see you back here next week.
Thank you.
Gracias.